Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network 24/7, 365, visit www.xzbn.net. And for the programming we have on the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV, visit www.simultv.com. Our guest this hour is a young lady that's going to be talking to us who is a trained psychic and a spiritual medium. Now, Nancy, how do you pronounce your family name?
Nobody ever gets it right. So it's technically Dutertre, but nobody gets that. So it's going to end up being Dutertre, Dutertre, or I also answer to two turtles if all else fails.
All right, so if I call you Nancy Dutertre, am I right?
Yes, that's actually quite good.
Well, that's not too bad for a French guy.
So
your name means Nancy of the Head.
No, that would be de la tête. This is Dutertre, which means from the small hill.
Oh, the small hill. All right. So,
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Where should I start?
Well, what small hill did you come from?
I didn't, but my husband did. My husband is French,
Right.
and actually I've become French in the years. So I didn't come from a small hill. I've lived all over the United States. I've lived in England, France, and Germany.
Wow.
We moved a lot when I was a kid, and I became a businesswoman, then became an attorney, practicing in New York for close to a decade. I practiced securities litigation.
Right.
And then I did this kind of strange detour in my life, and I started to write a book about what I thought was going to be the psychology of intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to look through the literature of all the psychologists and psychiatrists, they didn't want to deal with intuition. And they were calling it things like empathy or resonant empathy or transference or countertransference. And in other words, I know what those things are, and none of them are intuition. And so they didn't want to deal with intuition, so I studied a bunch of neuroscience. I thought maybe they would have the answers. They didn't want to deal with it.
Wow.
And then I sort of went and I tried to find anybody who knew something about it, and that's what led me to psychics, psychic detectives, mediums, medical intuitives, military programs, just all kinds of stuff, artists, poker players, you name it. And I realized at a certain point that if I was going to write about this thing called intuition, that I had to understand it on a very basic experiential level.
Mm-hmm.
So I trained in it. I trained as a psychic detective for about 10 years, and that's what I do. I also trained in military-style remote viewing techniques, so I'm trained in several different types of remote viewing, and I've also developed my own type of remote viewing that I call TSP.
Now, who did you study remote viewing with the military?
I studied with Lynn Buchanan, and my mentor was Inga Swan.
Okay. Why did you decide to become a psychic?
Well, I didn't decide to. In fact, I was fighting it the whole way because, I grew up in a very academic family, very left-brained. Nobody believed in that stuff. I certainly didn't believe in it. And so I didn't decide to be that way. I'm just a curious person. I like learning, about different people and different ways of thinking. So
Sure.
I realized at a certain point when I was sort of involved in these training things that I was pretty good at it. And people would tell me that, and I would laugh at them because I thought it was ridiculous. And at a certain point, I realized, well, it's time to either accept this. I'd be silly not to accept it. I have enough proof already. And when you're an attorney, you kind of like proof. You like evidence.
But how do you go from being an attorney to being a psychic and a remote viewer?
Apparently, not too many people take that pathway. It's really hard to explain. When you have to change the way that you look at everything and the way that you process all types of thinking, it takes a lot of courage. And my biggest issue was always making a fool of myself because I don't like that. And I particularly, as somebody who, I'm very analytic. And so when you're analytic, you can always kind of reverse engineer your thinking. Mm-hmm. You can take it back and say, well, the reason why I got there was because of this, and it's all logical, it all makes sense. And you can prove it to other people. When you get into the psychic realm, you can't prove anything. There is no way to reverse engineer this because there is no logic, because you're not dealing with a linear, sequential type of thinking. The only way that you can prove it is by feedback. So feedback, particularly in different types of remote viewing, becomes really important. And that's how you could sort of say to yourself, well, okay, I'm on the right track, I get it, and I'm not a complete fool. But it's hard.
How would you describe psychic intuition?
Let me put it this way. I describe intuition on a kind of a sliding scale.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of times what people have done is they've separated out intuition that we all kind of know and we all get it from this crazy psychic stuff. And for me, from what I've learned, it's all on the same sliding scale, but you have different ratios of two different components, two different variables, conscious to unconscious awareness of, let's say the facts or the situation, and then rational to irrational thoughts. So if you start on the really conservative side, you have educated guesses, which we all get, and pretty much even, scientists and business people, and they all understand that. Educated guesses, you're just missing maybe a link or two in your in being absolutely 100% certain about something. You get into the kind of the middle of this sliding scale of intuition, and you get into the realm of things that are like gut feelings and hunches. The emotions start to have a certain weight in your understanding about life.
Right.
And you're missing more data, and it's more unconscious. All right. And then finally, you get out to the most liberal end, let's call it, which is the psychic realm. And in that realm, you're dealing with sometimes it's completely irrational, and sometimes it's completely not within your conscious awareness. And that's tough. I mean, if you're a rational thinker, that is really hard to go there.
So would it be fair to say you had to reinvent yourself?
Totally. Absolutely.
I've got about a minute and a half before I have to go to my first break. What was the biggest change in your life when you decided to, if you'll excuse the expression, come out of the closet with your with your desires to be part of the paranormal world and a psychic?
What was the thing that changed the most?
Yeah.
I think I really started believing in myself. I think for as much as you can go around the world and think that you trust yourself, you don't trust yourself until you are completely flying blind. And what it enabled me to do was to become a better lawyer, a better human being. I'm better in psychology. I'm better in a whole lot of things because it put me on what I call this superhighway of information.
Nancy, please stand by. You and I have to take our first break. Exo Nation, our guest this hour is Nancy Dutertre. And if you'd like to get more information about Sandy, visit her website, www.theskepticalpsychic.com. And Nancy and I will be back. Oh, there, I love that song. Thanks, Greg. Nancy and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studio in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, you can always get the current edition of the X Chronicles newspaper with our compliments that is read around the world at www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Nancy Dutertre is our special guest. She is the skeptical psychic. And why are you known as the skeptical psychic?
Well, it's not obvious yet.
Nope.
Skeptical because when you start out on the other side of the fence, you don't believe, you never had any experience with this kind of stuff, and you kind of don't want to go there because you don't really trust it or you're a little nervous about it,
Right.
yeah, you're skeptical. But it's a good kind. It's not the what I call the religious skeptics. And by that I mean zealots. I mean people who their go-to primary position is, I don't believe, therefore it doesn't exist.
Well, that's their right to believe that way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, coming from that other side of the fence, I have a huge amount of compassion for people who don't get it. I spend a lot of my time trying to explain how and why this works. And in fact, I've written a book called Psychic Intuition, which explains in terms of neuroscience, psychology, and linguistics how we all start out with these abilities, why we all lose them, or most of us lose them, and how we can get them back again. Because I'm just a trained person.
I understand your voyage that you took in getting to the conclusions that you have gotten to.
Yeah.
But if it is so legitimate, how come it isn't a recognized part of the scientific psyche that we people have?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's for exactly the reason that I've been talking about, which is your typical left-brained people, your analytic, intellectual, scientific, whatever people. They have only learned how to process thinking in one particular way, which is very sequential. It's linear.
Right.
We get that way because we start out learning language.
Okay,
Language
but
is
let me-
literally
let me
takes
ask-
that kind of time.
let
So
me
they
ask-
don't get it
Let me ask you this then. If we
Yeah.
are all born with it, why doesn't it all stay with us?
because we get trained out of it. Because our brains start to. In most people, the left hemisphere is dominant.
Okay.
Okay, so your right hemisphere, which is your holistic side, your non-analytic side, and tends to be your more psychic data side, gets wiped out. And they've done studies. They for a long time did split brain studies, and they showed that if for example, the left brain was shown an item, let's say a fabric with a particular color, and let's say it's a green fabric, but they use the word blue, and they put the word blue underneath, and only your left hemisphere sees it, it will say, oh, that's a blue item. If it's shown to the right hemisphere and does not have a word attached to it, it'll say green.
Okay.
We have disagreements inside our brain all the time, but because the left hemisphere, which is also where most of our language is located, it dominates. So that part of our entire reality literally, and I mean literally, disappears.
Then how come other things that we are born with are not wiped out? For example.
Oh, they are.
Well,
They
wait a
are.
sec, hold on here. What about talking? What about walking? What about cognizant reactions that we have? Why is it only the psychic that is wiped out and not these other traits that we're born with?
No, people have suggested, for example, that we're all born with perfect pitch, and it gets wiped out. We're born with certain abilities to learn other languages. Most of these abilities get wiped out between roughly the ages of 3 and 6. And they get wiped out because our language becomes dominant. The way that I have explained this is that instead of experiencing the world as if everything is unique and singular, and you have no way to compare it to anything, what we start to do is we start to use metaphors. Everything becomes relative to something else. Okay, so everything then becomes an abstract thought. So we lose our ability to experience the world literally, like a baby. Okay, babies just experience everything like it's the first time ever. They have no way to compare it to anything. And a lot of this psychic data that we get comes into our bodies and into our brains as we can't identify it. We don't have anything to compare it to. It comes in as nonsense. And if with our very developed linguistic brains we can't compare this psychic data to anything, it disappears from our reality.
Then how come some people retain it?
I think some people are encouraged to retain it. You know, the way that their families bring them up, you know, and they acknowledge certain things, and in other families they don't.
Were you
I think it has.
Were
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
Were you encouraged?
Oh, absolutely not. No. I come from a very academic family.
Oh, okay.
My father was a scientist, internationally recognized scientist, and my mother comes from a very academic family.
Okay.
So no, this stuff didn't exist.
Did you, looking back as a child, have any psychic experiences?
You know, I think I maybe had two that I can remember. One of them I recall. I think I must have been about 13 years old or so, and I was over at a friend's house, and we were talking about ghosts. You know how like young teenage kids talk about ghosts. Ooh, that's, you know, so much fun. And we got called down for dinner. We go into their my friend. It was her name was Beth. They were all eating dinner, watching TV, and I wasn't allowed to watch TV at that time in my life, and so I really didn't know what was on or didn't know what to expect. But there was this woman who comes out on the TV. She I don't know. I think she was holding a platter or something, and I knew immediately what she was about to say, and I said what she was about to say, and then she said it. And because even at that age, I was kind of, you know, I was an analytical type of kid, so
was it the lady? I'm a little confused here. Was it the lady on TV that you knew what was going to say, or the lady in the house?
The lady on TV.
How do you explain that?
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out when I was 13.
But as a
so
psychic now.
So I said to my friend, I said, "Oh, you know, in my head," because I asked myself, how could you know something that you can't know? So in my head, I had heard her father's voice saying what this woman was going to say. And so I said to my little friend Beth, I said, "Well, did your father say that? Could I have, you know, somehow?" And she said, "Well, actually, I think he was, but it was long before you came over to the house." He was talking about that particular show, and he had made some comment about whatever that, you know, this woman on the TV was saying. It's a stupid and complex little story, and it didn't make any sense to me. All I remember is I was thinking, there's no way in my reality that would have allowed me to have that information. And that was so confusing to me. I stuffed it in the, does not compute box in my brain, and I left it there.
Fascinating.
Then I had a mediumship type experience. Which I couldn't explain either. Didn't know what to do with that. Stuffed it in the same little place in my brain and forgot about it. But other than that, no. I mean, I just wasn't one of those kids who grew up, you know, seeing spirits and predicting and doing all that kind of stuff. But it's all trainable, and I know it's trainable.
I understand that you have an interest in ufology and aliens.
I do. That's also new.
How did that come about?
I didn't start out with that one either.
How did that come about?
How did that come about? Well, I would say that the really important, or the time when I finally said to myself, well, there's no getting around this one, was when I went to a local movie theater here in New Jersey. And I went with my daughter, who was, I don't know, she must have been about, 19 years old, I guess. And we saw the movie. It was Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, which is all about going backwards in time, by the way. And we got out of the movie, and there was nobody in the movie theater. I've never seen that before. Nobody. Maybe one employee, but I'm not so sure about that. But there were no customers. We walked out into this parking lot, it's a big shopping mall. It's a big, flat, open area. And we're going to the car, and my daughter pointed up in the sky, and she said, "What's that?" And I look up, and about 500 to 1,000 feet up in the air, there's a mass of about 20 to 30 orange lights. And we all know airplanes are using white, blue, or red. Nobody uses orange. So that was weird. So I thought, well, maybe somebody is like bouncing lights from somewhere on the ground and they're bouncing off of clouds and reflecting. But there was no cloud cover and there were no beams of light being bounced off of anything. And the closer we looked at this, the more you could make out it was a boomerang-shaped craft. It was the size of a football field, and it was sitting there doing nothing.
All right, we're going to have a bit of a cliffhanger here. I have to take my news break at the bottom of the hour. XO Nation, our guest this hour is Nancy Dutertre. I hope I'm saying that right. And Nancy and I will be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to visit Nancy online, her website is theskepticalpsychic.com. I'm Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Don't go away. Welcome back, Exonation. Nancy Dutertre is our special guest, and she is a trained psychic and spiritual medium. She wasn't born that way, and if she was, she doesn't remember it. She believes we all have the capability of tuning into the supernatural once we unlearn our logical processes and learn to trust the profoundly irrational processes of our mind. She loves evidence of the supernatural or paranormal, but doesn't get stuck on the concept. Learning how to trust the information that comes in a non-verbal, disorganized, fragmented fashion is not easy. You have to trust your insight, otherwise this kind of data is quickly dismissed by the brain. But you must then try to verify your information. Now this means that you must exist in a very uncomfortable mental place of being both a believer and a skeptic at the same time. This process will lead you to the truth. Nancy spent a lifetime attempting to master this strange balancing act. Her website is theskepticalpsychic.com. And before we went to the news break, Nancy, you were telling us about you and your daughter went to see a Woody Allen movie. It was very strange. There were very few people in the theater. You walk out into the parking lot, look up. Your daughter looks up, points at a very strange object in the sky, orange lights, later identified as a boomerang-shaped object. So take it from there.
Yeah, and my daughter started to say, let's go, let's get out of here. Mm-hmm. And she really freaked out when she saw it. And I said, no, I have to figure out what this thing is. What does it do? What the heck is it? And eventually a very large white luminescent orb sort of telescoped open off of the wings of this boomerang-shaped football field-sized craft, and it detached. It started moving around in this sort of curlicue fashion, like it was looking for something. Mm-hmm. It went behind the craft, came back over the top, redocked, and then disappeared in sort of a blink. And at some point, the craft either cloaked or dematerialized in three phases, starting with the tips of the wings, or I guess you would call them the boomerang, and then the center, and the very center, and poof, it was gone. And then, so the important part is after that, we went back, we didn't discuss it. I said, how about, to my daughter, I said, how about we try and draw what we both saw before we tell each other? So we both, in color, drew what we saw. It was identical. And for the next year and a half, we began to receive extremely strange telephone call interruptions. And I believe they were aliens contacting us after that event.
Why you?
Oh, I have no idea, and frankly, I don't think it has too much to do with me at all. I think that some people, well, no, I'm going to clarify that. Some people do see these craft, and some people can be looking directly at them, and they don't see them at all. So yes, in that sense, okay, maybe, because I've trained myself now to see things that maybe my left brain wouldn't be able to identify.
What happens if What happens if your right brain is wrong?
Well, your left brain can be wrong too. I mean, we can be wrong all the time.
I understand that, but I just asked you what happens if your right brain is wrong.
Well, then what happens? I mean, all I know is that it was confirmed by my daughter. She was also a witness.
Okay.
We both drew the same thing, which would tend to confirm that we both saw the same thing and experienced it. And then we both got the same telephone interruptions. Didn't matter whether, what combination of landlines or cell phones or whatever we were using. And eventually, some of her friends heard it, and some of my friends and clients heard it.
What kind of interceptions were they?
What would happen is we'd be having a normal conversation. All of a sudden, there would be a very weird, deep, electronic, male-sounding voice that would start talking. And as soon as it started talking, we couldn't hear each other, but we could both hear it. And I don't know what language it was speaking. It sounded like it was coming through huge amounts of like wave distortion. It would speak, and when it was done speaking, one time it did say my daughter's name, by the way.
Wow.
That was the only recognizable thing. It would stop, and then it would disconnect both of us simultaneously, and then neither one of us would be able to call back the other for usually 5 or 10 minutes. And as I said, that went on for a year and a half.
Now, where was it you saw this UFO? In the
Well, the
parking lot?
craziest thing. I mean, the New Jersey, United States.
Okay.
5 minutes from my house.
All right. Is it a major city? At what time was it?
No, not at all. I mean, this is roughly, say, a half-hour drive outside of New York City.
Okay. And what time of night was it?
It was 11:45 p.m.
Were there any other reports of UFOs made to the authorities or to the media that night?
Well, my daughter, when we got back, she said, "Well, we have to call the police and report this." So she picked up the phone, and I said, "Celine, maybe put the phone down for a sec. Let's consider this one carefully." I said, "What exactly are you going to tell them?" And she thought about it. She didn't know what she was going to tell them. I said, "Well, how about this? How about you ask them, if you're insisting on calling them, ask them if anybody's reported seeing anything strange in the sky tonight," which she did, and of course nobody had, even though it's right on it's on a highway. So you would think somebody would have seen something. I then, for the first time in my life, started going through. I realized that there are reporting sites and organizations for UFOs, which I had no clue because I wasn't into this. And I did see that there had been some reports in a neighboring town that night, at roughly that period of time, where they had seen some kind of a craft, nothing like what we saw though, coming in our direction.
The area where the sighting was made by you and your daughter, was it in a high air traffic control area, a controlled area?
No, not really.
No.
No. There you have Newark Airport. Newark Airport is roughly, I don't know, a half hour away.
Right, that's quite a
but
distance.
Their planes don't generally fly over our area. There's a couple of small airports, but nothing significant.
How did that sighting change your life?
Oh, well, if all of a sudden you realize there's a possibility of non-human intelligent species and that they're interacting with us, and they're interacting intelligently and have the capability to cut into phone conversations, potentially read your mind, get into your dreams, transact, with you. They can change your reality. So overnight, virtually, I mean, everything changes. It expands your entire concept of what is.
I understand you've written a book, How to Talk to an Alien.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah,
book.
and well, that sort of that grew out of my interest in being contacted that way. So I got interested in trying to figure out, who is trying to communicate with us, and what are the various types of ways in which non-humans intelligences can communicate. And so I researched it a lot, and I kind of discovered that there are probably many different species. They are communicating not only in human languages but in alien languages, and not just in this sort of sequential language that we all deal in, but they also communicate in very nonverbal, sometimes telepathic ways. So it's a huge area, and I was shocked because hardly anybody had ever talked about this before. I only found one serious researcher in the field.
And who is that?
He was a psychiatrist from the state of Delaware. His name was Dr. Mario Pazzaglini. And he had basically gathered, I don't know, maybe 100 or so different writing samples from contactees. And he had broken down the different types of writing samples into 3 different categories, what he called dot and line, cursive or script style, and geometric style for the different types of writing or alphabets that they have. And I found that to be a really useful kind of a guideline, a good starting point, although I think that there are more types than that.
So what message do you think the aliens are trying to give you?
Depends who you talk to.
I'm asking you.
You've got, I think, some that are trying to, well, the most obvious is save the environment, or save the world from destruction of humans by humans. Save the world from tearing certain dimensional fabrics. Humans need to start understanding, their own violent tendencies.
I understand these are wonderful messages, but why don't the aliens give these messages to the people who can actually make these changes happen? The people in power, the people in government, the leaders of churches.
I think, that was probably attempted. They say that was attempted, certainly in the U.S. with Eisenhower, who may have cut some deals.
Oh, you're talking about the MJ-12 papers here.
Well.
Okay, listen, we've got to take a break. We'll be right back.
Sure.
This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. Our guest this hour is Nancy Dutertre, and her website, theskepticalpsychic.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone. Don't go away. Nancy, are you finding commonalities across the board in the languages, the alien languages that you've studied?
Yes, there are some, but I have to tell you, I am extremely frustrated not to find more, and because that sort of bothers my whole sense of, how many groups are out there that are communicating in the same language, versus does this stem from the imagination of the human?
Mm-hmm.
And so it bugs me when I can't find more commonalities in the language. But yes, I would say what I did talk about in my book, How to Talk to an Alien, is I talked about 4 different cases where I found matches from let's see, it was an American guy in Florida, British woman, a couple of Japanese kids, and there was and a Brazilian man. Okay, so there are people all over the world, different time periods when they got this particular type of writing. It was the dot and line style of writing, and they do seem to be certain commonalities in it. The problem is you're not necessarily dealing with, like a Latin alphabet, or 26 letters or anything like that. And sometimes I've seen certain types of writing, for example, that tend to look more like the sort of ideograms that you might find in like the Chinese characters and that kind of thing. So it's been difficult.
In your opinion, is there a connection between the communications that you receive and others receive in the crop circles? I
think that they are condensed ideograms. That's my sense. I interviewed a guy years ago who claimed to be one of the secret crop circle makers in England. And he said that he had, was sort of wide-eyed and idealistic when he'd first heard about, these crop circles. He went and he found this group of, I think he said it was roughly 60 people at the time who were making them, and got sort of disillusioned until he started to realize that even among this group of human crop circle makers, that sometimes one person would get an idea for a design, only to discover that one or two other people had the identical idea and were building them on the same fields at the same time. Or they started seeing, the flying orbs of different colored lights over the crop circles. So he began to realize there's something going on that's beyond simply what he and his buddies were doing. So I think that it's so much connected in with the concept of human collective consciousness and tapping that, as well as expressing things through symbols that we can somehow collectively create and understand. I don't know if that's too complicated, but that's what I feel.
Have you found that being a psychic detective, spiritual medium, paranormal investigator, and remote viewer has been of any asset to you in trying to decipher alien communications?
Yeah, and what I think is that they are all related, which I never understood. I thought when I first started this voyage, I thought that, okay, psychics, that to be psychic is one thing. And then I realized psychic is related to paranormal events and dealing with spirits and other types of non-human entities. And I had no idea that any of that was related to UFOs or to alien entities. But it is. And the more that you are capable of communicating in those realms, the more information you can get. So, yeah, they are related.
Why, in your opinion, don't these visitors just land and get it over with and prove their point once and for all to each and every one of us instead of a select few?
Well, people have been asking that for a long time, although they did fly over the White House.
Allegedly.
What's that?
I said allegedly.
Well, yeah, except there are photos of them.
Well,
so.
Nobody can prove they are UFOs.
Well, I mean, what is proof of anything?
Let me see. If we're talking about Roswell, a crashed UFO would be kind of neat, or a dead alien. If we're talking about Bigfoot, a cadaver of a Bigfoot, and the list goes on and on and on.
So you're talking about being able to touch something physical and tangible, and that makes it real to you?
As an ex-police detective, yes.
Okay, I wrote my entire book, Psychic Intuition, which explains the difference between our concept of reality and perceptions. Perceptions can be highly, highly manipulated, so that all of us experience hallucinations. In fact, 39% of the world experiences very obvious hallucinations. But in any one of the five senses, the basic senses, you can trick the brain into believing that something has happened when it absolutely has not happened.
So how do we know these paranormal events aren't part of that 39% of the hallucination ratio?
Well, I think what you try and do is you try to get cross-collaboration, either with somebody else or with two or more of your senses. I think that's the best way to do it.
Once again, I have a hard time understanding the logic behind a lot of these sightings and a lot of these experiencers when there is, millions of people, billions of people on this planet who have not seen or experienced anything that is classified within the paranormal or in the genre of ufology, and yet there are millions who have.
Right.
What part does the media play in the desire for people to see UFOs or to experience a paranormal experience? Is there something in our social structuring right now that people want excitement and they're looking outside of the realm of reality for this excitement?
People are always going to look outside the realm of reality for excitement. There's no doubt about that. The problem is that if you're suggesting that people are only saying they're seeing these things because of what they're watching on TV, there have been sightings going back through the millennia. I mean, I talk about a case that I think was in 15th century China of a guy getting abducted, being on the medical exam table basically. They fiddled around with his heart, put his heart back in, and suddenly he finds himself, back on Earth. So you don't need a TV in order to be influenced to have these thoughts.
No, but as a lawyer, weren't you trained to deal in the facts?
Yeah. So what is a fact? And I think I do a lot of psychic detective work. So usually I'm looking for dead bodies, and what I have discovered, because who would have thought that if you know Zippo about, whoever the victim was, or the suspect, or anybody involved, or anything about it, who would think that you'd be able to get anything super specific like the name of a witness, like the color of shoes that were being worn by the victim, or the precise location on an island where it turns out it was the only place where the police or law enforcement ever decided to excavate. I mean, there are things that end up being so bizarrely precise that you say to yourself, well, I know that was impossible, but that's real. That is real. You just have to learn how to incorporate that into your concept of what is reality. It's a different way of connecting the dots.
All right, I can understand that, and I'll give you the psychic detective part. But when it comes to extraterrestrials, aliens, I personally think that's a little too far on the edge to be even considered as part of rational thinking.
Yeah. Well, listen, I probably would have agreed with you if I hadn't experienced that myself. In fact, I think I even wrote in my book, Psychic Intuition, I said, now that I've finally I've been able to experience ghosts. Now I've been able to see them with my physical eyes, hear them with my physical ears, feel them with my skin, and smell them.
How do you feel a ghost with your skin?
Oh, because they can touch you in a whole variety of ways. The way that I've experienced them is, and it's all done through corroboration of your different senses. So it's sort of a part of a package. But the way that I've felt them is as almost like a coolness or a cool breeze on my skin. But I have many friends who've been physically touched by them. They can feel the outlines of an etheric body or whatever. They could feel warmth, temperature, texture, size, all kinds of things. But anyway, what I wanted to say was that what I had said was, okay, now I finally understand what a ghost can be experienced as. So I believe in ghosts. I'm okay with that now. But I said I'd probably have to see an alien before I believe in one. I said that straight out. And now, it's sort of be careful what you wish for.
But
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm getting very short on time here, but just in a very few words, I thought you saw a UFO. You didn't see an alien.
Absolutely correct. And the only thing that I have experienced in terms of an alien in my physical world with my physical ears was those telephone conversations.
All right, Nancy, you and I have to say so long for tonight. Thank you for joining us. I find it rather amusing that you're a what is this again, Craig? Psychic detective, spiritual medium, paranormal investigator, remote viewer. Aliens communicate with you. And you've written a number of books. I don't know. I really can't buy into it. I really can't. X-Zone Nation, tell me what you think. Send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Whatever you do, don't go away or get abducted or communicate with aliens or whatever it is that you might do after listening to this interview.